There is a specific kind of stuck that has nothing to do with drama. Not the kind where everything is on fire, but the quieter kind where you stare at the situation in front of you and genuinely cannot locate the beginning. The problem is too large, too tangled, or there are simply too many of them stacked on top of each other, and so you sit there and don't start, because starting feels like pretending the whole thing is solvable. That feeling has an answer. A film found it. And the answer is not a speech or a montage, but a guy on Mars who is, by any reasonable measure, completely out of options, and who decides to start anyway by making a joke about disco music. That film is The Martian. Tonight, I want to tell you why it's exactly the right thing to put on. The year is 2035, and a crew of astronauts is 18 days into a surface mission on Mars when a storm arrives faster than anyone anticipated. The mission gets aborted, and in the scramble to the escape vehicle, one crew member, Mark Watney, botanist and mechanical engineer, takes a hit from debris and vanishes into the storm. His biomonitor goes dark, and the crew, with no other option available to them, leaves. He wakes up alone on an empty planet. Sitting 140 million miles from the nearest other human being, Watney does the inventory. The next mission to Mars lands 4 years from now, food runs out in roughly 300 days, and there is no working way to contact Earth. The wind outside is thin enough that a shelter failure kills him in minutes. And yet the film refuses to linger in horror. No tragic strings, no slow camera pull into the void. What Ridley Scott gives you instead is a man dressing his own wound in silence, starting a video log, surveying the full scope of what has happened to him, and then announcing with genuine calm that he is going to have to science the hell out of this. A man, a habitat, 4 dead years of Martian desert, and a decision. Everything else in the film is what happens after that decision. Most people walk away from The Martian remembering that it's funny. Matt Damon is charming, the disco music is a running joke, and the whole thing feels somehow like a comedy despite being about a man slowly running out of everything. All of that is true. Underneath it, though, sits something the film never once explains, and something most viewers never consciously catch. Watney's humor is not his personality, it's his technique. Watch him carefully in those video log scenes. He is not naturally breezy. Behind the wisecrack, exhaustion lives around his eyes. His potato crop, months of careful work, got destroyed by a pressure breach in the airlock. The resupply rocket exploded before it cleared the atmosphere. Contact with Earth dropped out. He looks into the camera knowing that any one of a dozen variables can end him at any moment, and then he makes a joke. Not because he doesn't feel the weight of it, because he does. A quiet line from the mission psychologist back on Earth reveals something most viewers glide right past. Watney got selected for the crew specifically because of this. When pressure built up among the astronauts during training, he would crack jokes until the tension broke. The ability to laugh under impossible pressure wasn't treated as a charming quirk by the people who chose the Ares 3 team. They counted it as competence, as a skill, and on Mars it turns out to be as load-bearing as the oxygenator. Every wisecrack, every absurd aside to the camera, is a man refusing to let the problem swallow the whole moment. He names the terrible thing, wraps a joke around it, and moves on to what he can actually do next. The resupply rocket explodes, and he watches the footage alone, and he says nothing funny at all. He just sits with it, and then, after a while, he gets up and starts calculating what he still has. That silence is the most honest moment in the film. The jokes aren't denial. They're what he does instead of stopping. Each one is a breath between a problem and the next step, the mechanism by which he keeps starting. The film never spells this out. It doesn't need to. You feel it building in the background until by the end, what you understand you've been watching isn't just a survival story. It's a working demonstration of how to stay functional inside a situation you cannot escape. Every time I watch this film, something about the video log pulls at me that has nothing to do with the plot. Watney records his days, his plans, his setbacks, and it seems at first like a narrative device, a clever way to let the audience hear his thinking. The mission psychologist offers a different explanation for why he actually does it. When facing something unsurvivable, people want to be heard. They don't want to disappear without leaving a record. Watney talks to the camera not because anyone is listening, and for months no one is, but because putting words around an experience keeps it bounded. Describable. If you can describe something, you are not completely inside it. You are also just slightly above it, looking at it from a distance it would otherwise refuse to give you. The log is what keeps him a person rather than just a circumstance, and that instinct stretches far beyond science fiction. The urge to narrate your own disaster, to write it down, to say it out loud to someone or to nothing, is among the oldest human responses to being overwhelmed. The Martian places its most alone character in the most extreme possible version of that situation, and his response is identical to what most people reach for on a much smaller scale. He talks about it, so it stays outside him rather than consuming him from the inside. That's not optimism, it's a specific, deliberate, practiced refusal to be only what has happened to him. Consider what this material could have become in different hands. A man left for dead on Mars, cut off from contact, facing a planet built to kill him, alone in a way no human being has ever been alone before. Any of several films were available in that premise: a meditation on existential dread, a slow-burn horror picture, a tearjerker about a man losing his mind in the silence of the most remote place our species has ever reached. The raw material was there for all of them. Ridley Scott knows how to make all of those films. Alien is his. Blade Runner is his. He understands how to let darkness into a frame, how to let a landscape swallow a person, how to make the audience feel the terror of existing in something incomprehensibly large. Then he made The Martian, and he chose comedy instead, choosing to show a man who, when faced with the full inventory of his situation, responds by complaining about 1970s music. That was not a concession to the market. Scott and Matt Damon talked at length before shooting about the tonal register the film needed, because getting it wrong in either direction would collapse everything. Too sincere and it becomes maudlin, too flippant and the stakes drain out of it. What they arrived at is something more precise: a man fully aware of how bad this is, never pretending otherwise, who has decided that the only response compatible with staying alive is to keep moving and find something to laugh at while he does. The disco is central to this. It's the only music available on Mars because it was the only music on Commander Lewis's personal drive, and Watney despises it, genuinely and vocally, at considerable length. He complains about it to a camera no one is watching, in a habitat on a planet with no one to agree with him, and then he plays it anyway, every day. Not because he likes it, but because it is there and it is sound, and sound is something, and something is not nothing, and not nothing is where survival begins. At one point, Mission Control agonizes openly over Watney's psychological state. Vincent Kapoor is genuinely distressed, asking what it must do to a man to be 50 million miles from home, thinking everyone has given up on him, alone for that long in that much silence. The film cuts directly to Watney dancing alone in the habitat to a song he claims to despise. It's not mocking the concern, it's answering it. The question nobody thought to ask was not whether Watney would survive, but how you stay human in a place with no other humans, and the answer, apparently, involves badly appreciated 1970s music and a camera you narrate your problems to as if someone is listening. Scott said he wanted no self-pity in this film, not one frame of it, and he got exactly what he wanted. Most survival films cannot resist the pull of misery. The Martian stays urgent and alive throughout, and the discipline behind that choice is why it has stuck around the way it has. Here is something The Martian earns that most survival stories don't bother attempting. The audience cares about the people trying to reach him just as much as the man they're trying to reach. Running in parallel to Watney's story on Mars is an entire film happening on Earth, one populated by people making difficult choices with inadequate information and no margin for error. Vincent Kapoor, the director of Mars missions, has to hold the entire operation together while the press asks questions he can't answer yet. Mindy Park, a satellite technician doing routine image reviews on an overnight shift, notices something that shouldn't be there: moved equipment, a clean solar panel. She's the first person on Earth to understand that a man everyone already eulogized is still alive. A junior analyst, alone at a screen in the middle of a shift, looking at a photograph of a dead planet and reading it correctly before anyone with more seniority even knows to look. And then there is Mitch Henderson, the flight director, who spends most of the film being the person who is right in every argument and has no authority to act on it. He says they need to tell the crew that Watney is alive, and gets overruled. He says the crew deserves to decide for themselves whether to risk their lives on the rescue maneuver, and gets overruled again. Then quietly and off-screen, he does something that will probably end his career. He leaks the rescue plan to the crew anyway, encoded inside a corrupted data file. The film doesn't stop to celebrate this, it just lets it happen and moves on. But what Mitch chose was one man's life over his own professional future, and he did it without making a speech about it. Rich Purnell, the astrodynamicist who works alone for weeks on an orbital calculation nobody asked him for, and who genuinely does not know the director of NASA's name when they share a room together, uses a stapler to explain his rescue maneuver to the literal head of the space program, whom he does not recognize. That scene is one of the funniest in the film and also a portrait of someone for whom the problem is the only thing that exists, and hierarchy has simply never felt real enough to register. What the film builds through all of these people is a case for something Scott has described as the film's central paradox. The most alone any human being has ever been is also a man who is never truly alone, because the moment the world knows you need help, individuals inside large and slow institutions decide that this specific problem, the problem of this specific person, belongs to them. Not because they are heroic by nature. Not because the institutions are good. Because a technician on a night shift read a photograph correctly, and a flight director decided a man's life was worth his job, and a mathematician who doesn't know your name stayed up for weeks on a calculation you never requested. That is a quiet and radical thing to believe. The Martian believes it without reservation. Aboard the Hermes, the ship carrying Watney's crewmates back toward Earth, the crew receives a file that was never meant to reach them. Hidden inside what looks like a corrupted message from a crew member's wife is a set of calculations describing a maneuver that could bring them back to Mars in time to intercept Watney before he runs out of everything. The plan adds more than a year to a mission they are already exhausted by, requires them to commit what is technically an act of mutiny against NASA, and could end the careers of their commander and their pilot. Commander Lewis puts it to a vote, and every single one of them says yes without hesitation. No deliberation scene, no one argues for going home. They just decide. The film could have turned the crew's sacrifice into the emotional centerpiece, dwelling on the weight of the decision, the personal cost, the fear. Instead, it treats the choice as obvious. Of course they go back. The only real question was whether anyone would give them the information they needed to make the call. Jessica Chastain carries something in Commander Lewis from the first frame she appears in after leaving Mars, the weight of a commander who made the correct call by any rational calculation and has not forgiven herself for it. When she tethers herself out into the vacuum during the film's climax and reaches toward Watney across the distance between them, it is not just a rescue, it is the end of something she has been carrying for 549 days. The film never explains this. You understand it because you have watched her carry it. What separates The Martian from most survival stories is that the survival on offer is never only Watney's. Every person in the film is surviving something. Guilt, bureaucracy, fear, the particular weight of another person's life resting in their hands. Watney is just the one doing it on Mars, with better jokes and worse music. The movie asks, very quietly, what it means to belong to other people. Not in a romantic sense but in the oldest sense, the sense where someone somewhere is calculating trajectories and working overnight and making career-ending choices because you are alive and they know it. And that is simply what that knowledge requires of them. Watney survives Mars because he is brilliant and resourceful and relentlessly functional. He gets home because of everyone else. Most science fiction treats science as spectacle. It builds worlds, generates threats, and justifies why the technology works differently here than it does somewhere else. The Martian uses science as character. Every calculation Watney runs, every chemical process he configures, every time he stares at a number and determines whether it means enough or not enough, the math is not there to impress anyone with accuracy. It's there to show how a specific kind of mind keeps itself from breaking. Watney being both a botanist and a mechanical engineer is not a coincidence in the writing. It means he can grow things and fix things, and between those two abilities he can address almost every category of problem Mars presents. What's more interesting, though, is the way the film connects competence to calm. Every time the situation should be sending him into panic, the potato crop gone, the communication link down, the launch vehicle needing to be stripped to its bones, the camera finds him calculating, not deciding, not spiraling, running numbers, checking variables, staring at results. The math is not what saves him, the math is what keeps him from stopping. Both things Watney reaches for under pressure, the jokes and the calculations, are performing the same function. They are ways of staying in the problem rather than inside the fear of the problem. Running numbers and falling apart cannot happen at the same time. Making a wry observation about the quality of the disco and being paralyzed by the scale of what is happening cannot happen at the same time either. Each one is an act of small discipline, pulling him back from whatever waits at the edge of the moment if he allows himself to stop. One of the quieter scenes in the film places Watney and the rover during the long drive towards Schiaparelli, watching old television through static on a tiny screen, eating potatoes in silence. No jokes, no log entry. Just the planet outside and the dim glow of a screen. That moment shows what all the cheerful calculation has been costing him, what it has been keeping at arm's length for hundreds of days. The film lets it breathe for just long enough, and then Watney turns off the screen and checks his route. Calling The Martian a love letter to science is accurate but undersells it. What the film values about science is not the facts or the discoveries but the practice of it. The choice to treat a catastrophe as a variable, to decide the universe is a set of problems rather than a sentence. That is not really a scientific belief, it's a philosophical one, and it's the reason this film reaches people who have no interest in orbital mechanics, because you don't need to understand hydrazine chemistry to recognize the feeling of sitting with a problem too large to start, and choosing to treat it as a calculation rather than a verdict. Back on Earth, Watney stands in front of a group of astronaut candidates about to begin their training, and he is their instructor now. The man who survived 561 days alone on Mars, who grew food in his own waste, who drove a rover across a desert the size of a continent, who punctured his own spacesuit to use escaping air as a thruster, is standing at the front of a room fielding questions. The first one he addresses is the question he says he gets asked most often. Did he think he was going to die? Yes, absolutely, and that, he tells them, is exactly what they need to know going in, because it will happen to them too. Space does not cooperate. At some point everything goes south, and the moment comes where a person says, "This is it, this is how I end." And then there is a choice. Accept that, or get to work. You just begin, he says. You do the math. You solve one problem, and then the next one, and then the next. Solve enough problems, and you get to come home. Notice what that speech does not contain. No mention of courage. No mention of willpower or faith or the power of believing in yourself. Those are all real things, and other films about survival lean on all of them. This film does not. What Watney describes is a procedure. Begin. Do the math. Solve one problem. Move to the next. The editors chose this over a more thematically explicit alternate ending that had been scripted, one where Watney delivered a monologue about human instinct and collective effort. That version was cut because it explained what the film had already shown. The speech that survived explains only the method, which is the only part that travels. It is, in its way, the least stirring survival philosophy anyone has ever offered, and the most portable one. It strips away everything that sounds good and leaves only what actually works, and the reason it lands as hard as it does is that it asks nothing of the listener that they don't already have. No special bravery required, no exceptional circumstances necessary, just the next problem and the willingness to start on it. 2.5 hours of film have been showing you this. Frame by frame, not a hero but a procedure. A man applying the same small discipline over and over, naming the problem, making the joke, doing the math, moving forward until the problems ran out. The speech at the end is the film saying quietly to anyone who will hear it, you are watching a method, not a miracle. The other films available in this material would have been about something that happened to Mark Watney. The Martian is about something Mark Watney did, and that distinction, small as it sounds, is why the credits roll and the disco starts up again, and you feel somehow more capable than you did when it began. The Martian does not promise that everything will be fine. The supply rocket blows up, the airlock fails, the plan changes, and then changes again. Things go wrong in a film built entirely around things going wrong, and nobody pretends otherwise. What the film offers instead is something harder to find. A man who locates the next step every single time, not because he's constructed differently from the rest of us, but because he chose, somewhere in that first long night on Mars, that making a joke and getting back to work was the only move available. And around him, 140 million miles away but around him nonetheless, are people who made the same choice in their own way, on their own terms, with their own things on the line. Put it on tonight. Watch it for the jokes if that's what draws you. Or watch it for the quiet moments between the jokes, the ones where Watney is sitting with something impossible and then getting up anyway. That's where the film actually lives. When it's over, leave a comment and tell me which character from the Earth side of the story hit you hardest. Not Watney. The people working to reach him. Every time I watch this film, my answer is different, and I'd like to know yours.